Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Before we get started, if you've enjoyed listening to Beyond the Wrench, be sure to rate and review this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We want to thank all of you for listening. I would truly appreciate the support and all of the comments and just all of the questions that we get as a result of the podcast, and hope that you keep them coming. We really, really enjoy that. As for today's episode, I have with me John Eckelberg, who is the director of the Wisconsin High School Racing Association. As we kind of talk through this, you'll get an idea of why he's on the podcast and really some of the really cool things that he's doing to promote racing within our youth, and really just, I don't know, it's just been a really cool program. So how are you doing today, John?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on today, Jay.
Yeah, thank you. Typically, we would start right off with getting into the background of the guest, but with this scenario, I want to start with the High School Racing Association because I do think it's a phenomenal idea. I was able to attend a race this past summer where I really was introduced to it, right, and thought it was kind of a different concept. So let's start there, and then we'll dive into your background. But tell us what the High School Racing Association is all about.
Yeah, the High School Racing Association, or HSRA, is an all high school division at multiple tracks, multiple racetracks, both asphalt and dirt. But the HSRA was started in 2020 by La Crosse Fairgrounds Speedway in West Salem, Wisconsin, and Madison International Speedway in Oregon, Wisconsin. So it was those two tracks that they saw a need. The promoters, Chuck and Greg, saw the need to get young people into the sport and to really grow things from the ground up, figure out a way to make sure that our sport is around for a long, long time. So they had this idea of the High School Racing Association. Then COVID hit and it kind of slowed things a little bit, but they did still proceed with the 2020 season, and Toma Sparta Speedway came on board as well. And it was just the track promoters working on HSRA and promoting it and running it themselves. And then at the end of 2021, I met with Chuck and Greg, and they asked if I'd be interested in being the director of the High School Racing Association to really grow it. So it's an all high school division. It's not it's not high school kids that we're throwing in with veteran drivers. It's high schoolers racing against each other, and that's it. And there's multiple tracks across Wisconsin, and then now going into 2023, we'll have some Illinois tracks as well, talking with tracks across the country about coming on and really making this a big thing. But they're, similar to like the six-shooter class, they're all six-cylinder cars, pretty much stock, off of the street, other than safety enhancements, the 2-point roll cage, minimum, door plate, window net, all the driver safety equipment, belts and seats and what comes with that to keep the drivers safe, but not for racing tires. They're street tires, and trying to make it a truly an entry level position for these kids.
What I appreciated about it when I was able to go see it in person was how good the competition was. I think when you first hear it come over the loudspeakers that there's these high schoolers that are coming out and racing, and you're like, okay, what's this going to be? And when they came out, they put on a show. I mean, it was really good racing. You could tell they were fighting for every inch, and it was just a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and that's been really cool to just watch them grow throughout the season. The first night out at the beginning of the season, there's a lot of newer drivers out there. Some of them don't even have a driver's license yet. And so it's a little bit more mild, and the pack of cars is spread out. But by the end of the season, they're all racing there together, and to see the growth of so many of the drivers has been really rewarding.
It has to give some of these kids, young adults, an opportunity at racing when they might not have gotten it otherwise. Racing is an expensive sport. It's not for the faint of heart, both for just the guts it takes to race and the checkbook it takes to race. How did you go about that part in funding these cars, or having the high school be able to fund these cars? Because I do think it's really unique, because it gives perspective and gives the opportunity to maybe that kid that wouldn't have had a chance to have it otherwise.
Yeah, and we know that one of the biggest barriers to entry for racing is the cost involved. And so we've really tried to do what we can to make it as inexpensive as possible for these young people to get into the sport. So because they're high school athletes, there's no monetary purse at the end of the night for them at each track, but there's also little to no gate fee to get into the pits. So these HSRA racers pay $25 for the entire season for all, that gets them into any HSRA race at any track. And so we're trying to offset some of those costs for them. A lot of restaurants near the racetracks that are involved have come on board to sponsor a meal or a meal voucher for each of these kids every time that they're racing at that track. Quick Trip has come on board for to provide gift cards to all of the race winners, both heat and feature race winners. Weir's Machine in Bangor, Wisconsin, provided a scholarship for one of the racers at the end of this last season, and we're just looking for more and more opportunities to keep doing that, because racing is expensive, and all of these cars are the responsibility of the racers and their teams and their family, and so we want to make it as realistic as possible for them to get into the sport. Go ahead, John. Yeah, as far as the school's involvement, it's kind of up to the school at this point of how involved or how not involved they want to be. We certainly are talking with a lot of the schools who have racers out there and trying to get them more involved. There's unfortunately not as many automotive programs and those technical and welding classes and stuff like that in high schools anymore. So we're trying to, there's on one end of the spectrum, Melrose Mindoro High School became the first high school in the nation to make auto racing a letterable sport. So their students after 2022 received an athletic letter like they do in football and basketball and volleyball. And so, that school's very much involved. The cars aren't being worked on at the school, but they recognize that they have student athletes, participating in this non-traditional sport, if you will. And then other schools are like, we'll promote it to our racers, but we don't, want to go any further than that at this time. So it's kind of a wide spectrum, and we leave that up to the schools of how involved they want to be, but we're trying to get the high schools more and more involved, whether it's their, tech teachers, or simply promoting it to their students, or giving their students a letter who are participating.
I think that's the coolest thing in the world, that you can letter in racing like that.
Right. Where was that years ago?
Right. You're right. The younger version of me is super jealous of that, because it is an accomplishment and something that's really cool for these kids. The other thing I think it does is it does help shine a light on these programs at the school. If the school were to use this correctly, I think they could have a lot of good. Like, they could do some things that bring notoriety. I know I've talked to a lot of high school instructors that struggle with that. To some of the bigger programs, I talked with a friend of mine who said he has trouble even getting people to understand that they have a program, that they have an automotive program. But then some of those smaller schools that are looking for something to do that really, I think, helps train them. Racing, I read there was like a meme out one day about talking about all the skills it teaches you, life skills it teaches you. And there's so much there. It is teamwork. It is, learning the mechanical functionality of a car. It's, trying to figure out how to make it go faster and what you can do and adjust. And I just feel like there's so much to be gained with what you're doing, both from the notoriety of the school program as well as what we're teaching these young people. There's so much to be learned there.
Exactly. And part of the HSRA rules is that each of the racers are running their school colors or their mascot on their car as well. So the high schools are already getting recognition out on the track, and to see the the amount of crowds that come out to watch these high school students, there's, teachers and friends and family and administrators that are people that maybe haven't been to the racetrack ever or in a long, long time are coming out and watching these kids, these students racing. And the school's already getting that recognition on the car. And as you said, it does teach them so many different skills, not only on the mechanics side, but marketing and
marketing's a big one.
Communication and public speaking. There's interviews at the racetracks every week, and I took a few of them down to the radio stations in La Crosse this last race season, and had them on 4 different radio stations just talking about HSRA and their schools and just the season that they had. So it is there's so many different skill sets that are being learned and practiced through auto racing. And, one of the biggest walls, I guess, that we hear often is, well, isn't it dangerous? And there's always that risk, but there's also that risk in football and basketball and those sports that are sponsored by schools and are happening in the schools. You're probably more likely to get hurt on the football field than you are in one of these race cars with the amount of safety equipment that goes into them with the roll cage and the door plates and window nets and fire suits and racing seats and belts. There's so much safety that goes into them that has been it's been teaching schools and parents and community members that about that piece of it.
Well, it's doing it in an environment that is structured. Right. I look back to when I was a teenager, I liked to go fast and everything, right? And so doing it in a way where you can do that in a a really structured environment where you do have safety crews on hand, you do have everything there. I do think you're spot on. Regardless of what you do for sport, there's going to be danger and there's going to be something, some variable there. But when I looked at the cars, it did look like they were, fairly well constructed, that there was some thought put into it. And, is there an inspection process that you go through from the safety standpoint?
There is. Yeah. Every racetrack is checking for those safety requirements on the cars, checking that they're, using the appropriate tires and, and also, from the fairness perspective, checking that there's not anyone, throwing a bunch at the car that is not legal as it relates to the HSRA rules. But yes, safety is the most important thing. And if someone shows up that doesn't have those safety requirements that are specifically stated in the rules, they unfortunately won't be able to race.
That's probably a great thing. How did you bridge these conversations with the schools, right? Because I'm guessing there's maybe some type of misperception of how dangerous it is, or, they, as a school administrator, probably the last thing you want to do is put a kid in harm's way, right? Mm-hmm. But being able to go to them and explain, how this works and how, it is actually fairly safe. Is that a difficult conversation to have with an administrator, or how does that work with talking with these schools?
Yeah, certainly it is a difficult conversation and something challenging when you're talking to people that maybe don't know anything about cars or racing or have never been to a local racetrack. Those, you're starting from ground zero essentially with those conversations. So it requires an open mind and understanding the fact that many of these sports have a risk. When students choose to be an athlete, there's a risk, whether it's basketball, football, archery. There's rodeo in schools now. There's trap shooting, all these other sports that come with a risk, and racing is no different. But as you mentioned, the racetrack is a controlled environment. It's not the highway. They're having the chance to go fast and to really learn learn how to drive a car. HSRA racers have to be between 14 and 19 years old. So, half of them don't have a driver's license yet. They just have to be high school age, which is also a little bit of a fear with people, but it's a controlled environment. These students are getting practice time on the racetracks. They're having a chance to compete against other students, other racers their age. And if there's someone that's causing problems out there and maybe needs to take a timeout and be sent to the pits, then we're going to make sure that happens to keep everyone safe.
Do you have to be the timeout guy? Are you the one that has to sit the people down?
If at the end of the race night, it's usually me having those conversations of, we need to work on some patience out there.
We talked about this leading into this, and the reason this is so fascinating to me is that I grew up in racing, and so much of what you're saying are the things that I was arguing for when I was trying to get, I was going from karts into a car, and was, trying to debate this with people, and being able to say, hey, you know what, I am wearing all the safety gear, I'm wearing a fire suit, and head and neck restraint, and wasn't quite as advanced as it is now. Of course, it was more like a neck roll, but
right.
I do think there's that misconception of what racing is something that what you're doing helps change a lot of that perception in general, and at the same time brings exposure to cars, right? Like, I think, I talked to somebody that was like, yeah, I've got a 16-year-old doesn't want to get their driver's license. I'm like, what are you talking about? When I was 16, I couldn't wait to get on the road. That was like that was my way to freedom, right? But I think when you're looking at this changing demographic of young people coming up, I do think that exposure to motorsports and to cars and to working with your hands a little bit and doing it in a way that's really fun could bring more people into our industry, but then just more people to be interested in racing and know how hard it is. I don't think people truly appreciate how hard racing is.
You mean it's not just going fast and turning left?
My brother, we grew up in a shop, right? And my brother is a financial advisor, never wanted anything to do with the shop, but didn't want to race. And it's funny taking people out, even onto like the local karting track, and having them go at a fairly decent rate of speed, and them starting to say, oh, you know what, I'm kind of sore after that. And you're like, yeah, it's hard.
It's a workout.
It's not easy to do, and you don't know it or you don't appreciate it until you're actually in a vehicle doing it.
Exactly. And that's what's been really cool too, is seeing these racers and these families that have never had anything to do with racing come out and be a part of the High School Racing Association series and really become a part of the racing family and the racing community. There's certainly racers out there that come from a racing family. Their dad, races late models, or they've grown up in the sport like I did. But there's also a lot of racers and families and fans that are brand new to the sport, and that's a big goal of ours.
That's
we want
what we
more
need.
People in the stands. We want more people out there on the track. So that's been really cool to watch those racers advance and really just grow into their comfort levels out on the track too.
Have you heard of WrenchWay School Connect? WrenchWay School Connect is a free tool that makes it easier for schools to connect with local shops and dealerships and get the resources they need to attract students to technician programs and educate them about the industry. Schools can post requests for donations and resources from shops, and shops can post resources they have available to schools in their area. Shops and schools can visit wrenchway.com to contact us and learn more. Link is in the show notes.
I do want to use this, and I'm doing this podcast a little backwards of what I normally do, and I wanted to start with the association first and be able to kind of understand what that is. But you had mentioned you growing up in racing. Let's talk about you a little bit, and then we'll probably pop back to the HSRA after that. But there's a reason why you're in the position that you are today, leading this. Give us an idea how you grew up. How did you get into racing to start with?
Yeah, well, I think I was in the grandstands at about a week old, but my
didn't have a choice.
Right, exactly. My family, Eckelberg family racing, raced for 35 years primarily at La Crosse Fairground Speedway. I grew up in West Salem, Wisconsin, a mile from the track. And my dad started racing in 88. Yeah, 88. And raced my entire childhood. So he raced, everything from it was the beer stocks back then, or Thunder stocks, hobby stocks, that are also known as, and worked his way up to the sportsman and the late models. And as soon as I turned 16 and was old enough to race at lacrosse, I was in a Hornet car. My sister followed 2 years later, and my mom raced the Queen Bees or Women on Wheels division every time that they had that. So, at one time for a few years, it was my dad, myself, and my sister all racing out at the Speedway. I raced my dad's last few years in late models with him. So we all kind of made that journey from the quarter mile track to the 5/8 mile track at lacrosse, doing the sportsman class, and then ending in late models too. So my dad and I raced a few years together, his final years, and then he retired after 29 years of racing. Wow. I kept going. My sister kept going. And so I raced 17 of those 35 years myself. And then in 2022, we decided to retire out. So it was our 35th Eckelberg Family Racing's 35th race season, and it was our last race season. So I was we also had a teammate, Justin Mulliken, who took over for my dad after he retired a few years back, and have just been a fixture at Lacrosse Speedway for 35 years. So it'll be a little strange not having a home necessarily in the pits at Lacrosse, but still will be up there. They're still running the HSRA division, and I'm sure my family will be in the stands more than they think that they will be.
Did you get to race Oktoberfest then?
Oh yeah. Yep. Raced Oktoberfest most years. I did not this last season. The race cars both sold before Oktoberfest, so we let them go and didn't run Oktoberfest ourselves, but had just a really fun part-time last season. And I had finally my first late model win this last season, just a few weeks before we retired. So it was good timing, and I was like, oh, hey, this is fun.
Go out on top while being able to keep your toe in the water with this HSRA thing. I think that's such a cool thing. What was harder to drive, that first car, I always heard, a hobby stock at times was harder to drive than a late model. I'm curious as to what you thought.
I probably had the most fun in the Hornet class on the quarter mile track. My first few years, it just so much less pressure and just a really fun class to race. But late models was of course a lot of fun. I probably had the most difficulty racing the sportsman division.
Yeah.
So I didn't stay there real long, and then I moved up into late models and was much more comfortable there.
I've heard that from a lot of people, that, you're seeing, I think, a lot of these families now that are going straight from Legends cars to a late model or something along those lines. And their reasoning is that it's so different to race at a lower class than it is a late model that they just skip over it and goes directly into a late model.
Yeah. And like these days, there's not much of a cost difference. So
which is nuts.
You might as well. Right. Yeah. Some of these sportsman cars they're getting up there in price. So at that point, you might as well just go to a late model.
I remember it was probably 20 years ago when I was racing. I was racing a hobby stock when I was like 16, and there's a guy that had like $25,000 into his engine and in a hobby stock, and we're like, okay, like that's a touch much. Like at that point, why wouldn't you go to a different class? But I think that's also the value in the HSRA, is that you give people a chance to do it on equal footing as well. Like where it's not that there's going to have, somebody's going to have a distinct advantage. I'm sure there's things and people that work harder than others that have a better advantage, but for the most part, you're on a pretty level playing field.
Exactly. And that's a big goal of ours too, is to just keep that even keel, keep, it fair across the board, no matter how much people, how much funding racers have, but also how many times they can race. There's some of the HSRA racers that go to every one of the tracks that are participating if they can, and they'll race every week that there's an HSRA race somewhere. And there's others that choose to just race at their home track, and that's okay too. So we want to make sure that it is that level playing field as much as we can, and be truly an entry level division, and give these young racers the experience before hopefully moving up into some of these other classes and racing against some of the veteran drivers out there.
Does it work similar to racing in general, where basically you have your rule book and then they build the car to the rule book, or in this case, you're going to find that car and then kind of get it to where it needs to be to fit the rule book? And then I kind of want to walk through that process, because if a school says, okay, we want to sign up for this, we want to do this, and maybe there's that teacher out there that's not been exposed to racing, but their students are starting to say, there's a buzz about it, and I'm sure as you guys grow this, there's going to be more and more of a buzz. What advice would you give to that teacher on how to go about this?
Yeah, there's the racing community is so collaborative that I obviously can't help every single one of these racers build a car or find a car, but we've got those resources around each of the tracks. So if it's a high school near Slinger Speedway that wants to get involved, we've got veteran racers around there that are willing to help. But a lot of these racers are finding the cars at junkyards or at shops that maybe the car was in an accident and needs a new rear end, or needs some body work or whatever. The cars are out there sitting somewhere. They're older cars. They're 2006 or older American made models. And I think the most challenging piece that the racers have had is finding tires. They're just not as plentiful these days, because they can't be new tires either. They need to be at least 2 years old. And so finding those tires that are legal is the most challenging piece probably of the process. But we did lower that to a 2-year-old tire instead of 3 years old going into this season. So that'll hopefully help a little bit. But yeah, for schools or teachers or families or students that want to get into it, head to highschoolracing.org and check out the rules that are there. My contact information is on the website. If you have questions or want to be put in touch with someone that can help you find a car, or don't know how to need help putting in the roll cage, we have those resources around each of the tracks that are participating and can help teach people to do that, because that's what we're here for too, is to train people and to teach these racers and these teams to be able to have these skills and to do these things on the cars. Or if you need to borrow tools or borrow resources, we've got those people in our back pockets.
Well, in the audience that you're speaking to right now is primarily made up of people in shops at some level. It could be that car dealership or that independent shop or fleet or whatever it might be. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for our industry to get more involved in something like this, and it's not like a huge ask. You're asking for an older vehicle, and maybe, that dealership that's out there that's taking in a trade that is basically just going to take it to auction. This might be a great opportunity to get a car in the hands of a high school and say, hey, go to town. We'll help you, with whatever you need as it relates to getting it ready or advice. But there's so many talented people in these shops that I think could help out in that regard too. And that could help them build a connection. That could help them build a connection with a younger audience that they might not get exposure to otherwise, and do it in a way that's not breaking the bank, right? Like for a shop, this isn't a huge ask.
Exactly. And having the more feelers out there, the better. When someone's looking for a car or looking for tires or looking for parts, having those people that know what to look for, or maybe where to look for these things, that are, that I can say, hey, call this so-and-so body shop, or, so-and-so whatever. And, they might have some ideas of where to look, and they're, in your backyard or something like that. And even though these racers aren't receiving monetary purse, racing, a lot of them go out and get sponsors too. So, if you help a racer find a car, they can slap your logo onto their car, and thousands of people will see it at the racetrack every week.
Yeah, I think that's the other important thing to note. It's not just them running at these tracks. The show that I went to was at Madison International Speedway, which is a track that I grew up at and spent every Friday night there as a kid. And they're running with some pretty big names in terms of the late model show or the truck show or, whatever it is. It's a piece of a bigger show. And even though it might not seem like a big deal to have your logo slapped on an older vehicle that high school kids are racing, you're getting exposure that maybe you wouldn't even think of.
Exactly. And it's cool to be down in the pits at these tracks too, and see the super late model guys or some of these upper level divisions are like, oh, the high schoolers are out, let's go watch. And, they've been so impressed too. You mentioned being there, seeing them and just the level of competition that these high schoolers were competing at. These other racers have been so impressed with the quality of the driving and the cleanness of the driving. Everyone think, you might think like, oh, they're high school kids. They're probably like, banging off of each other. And, no, they've, for the most part been really clean racers and have kind of outshone some of the other divisions in, some weeks and how put together they are out there. And so it is truly, while it's an entry level division and these high school students racing, there's a lot of eyes on them, not only at each track each week, but around the country.
And it's a different type of young person. I think if you were to watch, and for those non-racing people listening, there's a bunch of different layers in racing, all the way up to the Cup Series, but like all the way down to these weekly racing series. There's been a major issue internally with the racing community about a lot of these kids that just come with a bunch of money and just try to tear each other up, and it's not good racing. Like, that's just not fun to watch. Whereas when I watched you guys race in Madison, it brought like a purity back to the sport a little bit. It brought kind of the roots of why this is so fun to begin with back into it. And I just genuinely had a blast watching them, and the crowd was going crazy. And it was I don't know. Like I said, I thought it brought some level of purity back to the sport that I think we were missing for some time.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really cool. And they're all working on these cars. The drivers and their parents and their race teams are working on the cars. They don't want to fix anything every week, and they don't want to have to go and find a new car because something happened that totaled their car some week. But they want to be filling it with gas and putting different putting different tires on it. So they're very, for the most part, very patient drivers, and we try and really instill that too of watching the other cars, watching what you're doing, be patient, and don't feel like you have to, you're not going to win on lap one. So we really try and teach along the way too, not only how to fix the cars and put together the cars, but just how to be respectful of everyone on the track and show that good sportsmanship. And they're all from different teams. Some of them might be from the same school, but there's 14 different high schools that were competing in 2022, and they still are all, if someone has an incident on the track, the amount of people that are flocking to that car to help get it together is really cool too. And you don't often see that in other classes too, but the high school division, they're all just, they want to help each other. They want to help each other do well and, provide for a successful and a fun and friendly season.
How do they select who drives? I'm guessing you've got kind of a collection of kids from a certain school. How do they pick who gets to drive?
It's kind of up to racers that are interested, and it kind of starts at that level. If there's some students that want to race, want to be involved in the HSRA division, it kind of starts with them to get involved, find a car, get their school involved to some level. And certainly there's a lot of conversation that I have with schools, but with the, it's not a WIAA sport. It's not, part of any larger sanctioning body or athletic association. We kind of have the flexibility to have schools involved as much or as little as they want to be. And it's really driven by those racers that are passionate about the racing industry or the automotive industry and wanting to just get out, have fun, and drive a race car.
This week's episode of Beyond the Wrench is brought to us by Zimbrick. The Zimbrick story began in 1965 when their founder, John Zimbrick, purchased a Buick franchise at the corner of Park and Regent Street in Madison, Wisconsin. John built his dealership around a philosophy he called loving care service, and the rest is history. Today, the Zimbrick family of dealerships has grown to 16 new car franchises. They have 20 service locations throughout Dane County, an additional store in Milwaukee, as well as 3 award-winning body shops. Zimbrick is behind every errand, every road trip, every commute, every holiday visit, and every emergency. Their customers rely on them for safe and reliable vehicles to get them there, and Zimbrick is always looking for talented individuals to help them in their mission. Winner of Best of Madison and Madison's People Choice Awards for 2022, Zimbrick is proud to serve its community. Visit the Zimbrick WrenchWay page at zimbrick.wrenchway.com to find out how you can join their team.
You mentioned something earlier that I think is really interesting, which is how many different skills it takes to run a race team. You need the ability to have some level of marketing. You need to have some level of engineering. And, you know, as these kids look to what their future careers are, there's so many different avenues. And I look at it, and if I were a school putting this together, I'm like, oh, you could do something really cool here. You could get some marketing students in, or students that have an interest in marketing, and maybe they create a website to help get more sponsorship, or, you know, something like that. I feel like there's an endless amount of possibilities to the different types of students you could get into this as well.
Right, exactly. And there's such a push right now too to get kids to go to technical and trade colleges, and there being such a shortage in the trades that it's, you know, why not? We had Western Technical College in La Crosse involved this last year too. They sponsored our regional championship event because they saw how important this was to get in front of students that are in high school thinking about their future and what they're going to do after high school, and, you know, get in front of them and have an audience with them of, hey, here's the kinds of things that we can offer at Western, you know, whether it's in the automotive program or, you know, other engineering type jobs, and you know, just expose those kids to what it looks like to attend a technical college. You know, for so long, I think it was go to a 4-year school, go to a 4-year school, go to a 4-year school, and now we're seeing the, you know, the downside of that there's so many shortages in the trades. And so being able to give these kids the opportunity to see what's out there for those opportunities, and see that, you know, you whether it's, you know, engineering or not, there's all these different opportunities to be involved in the automotive industry, wherever your skill sets lie.
Where do you see the future of this going? Because, as you know, I think my biggest issue, if I were in your position, would be trying to do everything for everybody, right? Like, this seems like something that could easily go nationwide. It seems like it could be something that, you know, if I'm a track promoter, I want this class in there, and probably more so than like a typical 4-cylinder class or something like that, because what you're doing is you're generating your next level or your next generation of racers who get exposure to it, who, you know, maybe it makes it a little less intimidating to go in the pit area, and, you know, less intimidating to drive in front of an entire crowd. You know, like I see so much potential for what you're doing here, and I'm curious as to how you manage this, what you think this will do. Do you think this is a nationwide thing at some point? Where do you envision this going?
Yeah, it certainly has the legs to be something nationwide, and it's headed that direction. We started just in Wisconsin, and you know, we're in Wisconsin this last season in 2022. We added Dells Raceway Park as a track in 2022, so had 4 tracks with La Crosse, Madison, Thomas Sparta, and Dells Raceway Park. And then going into 2023, we've added 2 more Wisconsin tracks with Slinger Speedway and Beaver Dam Raceway, which is our first dirt track.
Nice.
So that will be the HSRA. Current HSRA racers are super excited to be able to have the chance to race both asphalt and dirt now, which a lot of people don't have the chance to. They go dirt or they go asphalt. They don't have. There's not a lot of back and forth crossover. So we've added 2 more Wisconsin tracks. We're also going back into Illinois in 2023 with Sycamore Speedway and Macon Speedway. And there's a handful of other Illinois tracks that I'm talking to. I'm talking to racetracks and high schools in Utah and Idaho and Minnesota and Michigan and Ohio, and so there's a lot of other conversations being had, and we've already doubled the amount of racetracks in 2023 from 2022. So it's if it continues to grow like that each year, we're going to be looking pretty great. But we had probably, I believe, 26 like full-time, you could call them, HSRA racers in 2022, and many of them went to every track that they could, all 4 tracks in Wisconsin. They'd travel and go from La Crosse to Madison to Toma to the Dells, and I'd be shocked if that number's not at least doubled this year.
Wow!
So there's a lot of excitement around HSRA, a lot of people in the racing community that just didn't know that it existed until we started getting to more tracks and started getting a lot of media attention from, Melrose Mindoro making it a letterable sport. That saw just world or nationwide media attention, and NASCAR's watching us and seeing what we're doing. And I've talked to people over there, and just the whole country is kind of watching the Midwest right now and how this high school division is doing, and how can they implement that in their racing communities.
What's the range of schools that you're seeing participate? Is it a combination of smaller schools with bigger schools? Do you see any themes there? Is it just kind of all across the board?
Yeah, it's relatively across the board. Probably, most commonly some of those mid-sized schools, communities, schools around the La Crosse area, schools around the greater Madison area. But we've got students from Minnesota and Illinois that raced this last year too, and they would make the drive up to these tracks or over to these tracks. But it, probably smaller to mid-range schools are kind of the most common. They seem to be the easier ones to get into and get talk to the right people and have interest in adding this to, whether it's their shop class or their athletic roster or things like that. So, but we had students from 14 different high schools in 2022, and we added a team element too. So the racers all get their individual points like normal in a racing division in the standings, but there's also a team component. So the more racers from a school, the more points you're getting for your school. So Melrose Mindoro was the school champion in 2022, and followed by Onalaska High School and Royal High School. And so that's been a way we've been trying to get into the schools too and show them that we're recognizing them, and they're providing them with plaques for their students. And so that's been really huge too, to add that kind of school rivalry piece to it. As well. So, and we had only a 2-point difference between the first and second place individuals this last season too. So the competition's been really cool to watch.
It really is. Now, can a school field more than one car? I don't know if I understood you perfectly there, but is there a cap on how many cars they could field?
There's not. And, many of the cars are not being held at the high schools right now. The kids are working on them as they, either taking it to the school to work on it or working on it at their own shop and just kind of having some school involvement. But there's no cap on how many students from a given high school can race. The more that are from a high school, the more points you're likely to get for your high school. So we had, some schools that had five students racing, and then, some of them that had maybe one. So it's wide open.
I love that though, because I can't imagine even like in the same school, the amount of banter that goes back and forth between, if you got five people from one school racing against each other, I'm guessing there might be a little smack talk in there.
Right, exactly. And yeah, and there's siblings that are racing and cousins that are racing against each other. And, so that's, there's that family rivalry a little bit there too. So, but all, in good fun. And, certainly Melrose Mindoro with being a letterable sport now, that's increasing the amount of racers that they're going to have this next season, and hopefully getting quite a few more from that school. And we're really hoping that other schools in the region will continue to jump on and provide some recognition to these students that are giving their school recognition out on the racetrack anyway.
Are they open, the other schools? Do you see that they're open to potentially allowing their students to letter in this?
Yeah, there's some open-mindedness there. I think a one thing that we're having to kind of explain to the schools is they don't need to provide officials. They don't need to provide coaches or a facility. If they're going to be a letterable sport, generally there needs to be an advisor or point person in the school. But other than that, the only investment that it is required of these schools, if they choose not to, have it be a part of a shop class or something like that, is the letter itself and, a pin or whatever comes with that. So there's not a big cost investment. And even if they are working on these cars in their shop class, like they're there anyway, they're, needing to fill this class time with working on something that's worthwhile and teaching them these mechanical skills. So that's been, I think, that one of the biggest hurdles, in addition, outside of the safety conversation, but just explaining there's not really a lot needed on the high school side to make this happen. And it's actually really easy to get it approved to be a letterable sport. It just needs to go to the school board and they need to decide it's worth their time.
Oh man, I hope we get some traction on that, because I do think that helps give it some credibility and, really be able to formalize it a little bit, right? Like that
Exactly.
you get recognized at the annual banquet or like at the high school, right? The athletic banquet. Yep. It adds that credibility that I think we need. But man, how cool is that? That was the one thing I remember sitting at the track and the announcer talking about how those particular students had the ability to letter in racing. And I'm like, my goodness, like that is,
how'd that happen?
Yeah, that is so cool. That is so cool.
Yeah, it is. And certainly if there's other schools out there that, want to know more or want to figure out how they make this happen, reach out to me at highschoolracing.org. That's not my email, me at highschoolracing.org. Yeah. That's our website. Head to highschoolracing.org. My contact information's there. Or reach out to the athletic department at Melrose Mindoro High School. They've been very willing to have conversations with other schools that want to make this happen and kind of explain their process and just how easy it is to get a sport lettered at a high school. It's not a difficult process at all.
I look forward to, kind of at the future of this thing. And as the listeners of our program here think through this maybe a little bit better, we have a lot of the folks that are out that listen to this, whether they're technicians or owners or managers, somewhere in between. A lot of them are on advisory committees for these schools, right? They're in talking to them about curriculum. They're talking to them about various elements of their programs. And this might just be a great thing to bring in front of them, whether it's through the podcast or going through the website or, whatever it might be. As we're looking to get more interest in what we're doing as an industry, this is just an awesome way to do that. And I would encourage those of you that are listening to maybe bring it up in those meetings, bring it up as a way to be able to get better connected with the school. If you're helping them out maybe with some tools or some parts to help get the program off the ground, that could have a huge impact on a high school program and really help grow that exposure to our industry, to the service business as well. And I look, as I look forward to this, I do see a lot of opportunity for our industry to step up and try to help support some of these schools and help support what you're doing at HSRA as well. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, exactly. The more the merrier to be involved and to be out there talking about HSRA. There's a lot of ground to cover if I'm doing it by myself. So, or if, it's just, me and some of the racers or parents, the more people we can get out there that know about the High School Racing Association, are talking to people in the, in the industry or, at racetracks or, in schools, students that maybe whether they want to do other sports or not, there's this other opportunity for them to have a level of competition, to be a part of a team, and to be out there providing exposure to not only the school, but the, maybe the automotive program that they came from, or the shop that they got their car from, or, they're out there providing these marketing tools to people that are attending the racetracks. And we've got 6 on board for not 6, 8 tracks on board for 2023 so far, potentially even some more coming forward, and it's just going to keep growing and growing. So get on board now.
I think you're going to be a busy guy, my friend. I think this is this is really, really going to grow fast.
It's quickly turning into a full-time job.
Well, I commend you for everything that you're doing. I know at the heart of this is your passion for racing and getting more people involved. And I think what you're doing is just such a cool piece. And so I will say, give a shout out to Madison International Speedway and the Speedway up in La Crosse as well. I've been to hundreds of races at Madison International, but and probably about a dozen in La Crosse. And it's cool to see people look at this differently and in a way that makes it more accessible for more people. And I think that's going to have a huge impact on racing as we move forward. But then for our industry to get exposure to actually being able to work on something and being able to get your hands dirty a little bit in a way that is fun. So thank you so much for doing all of that.
Yeah. I'm super excited to see it just continuing to grow. And there's, we don't want these tracks to go anywhere, and we want to be able to go and spend our weekends at the racetrack. So the more racers we get involved, the more fans and that we get involved, and supporters is just gonna keep these tracks around longer and longer. So that's the whole goal, getting more people into the sport.
Well, we'll do our best to help you spread the word and get it out there. And again, if people want to reach you, how do they contact you?
Yeah, highschoolracing.org is our website. The rules are there, the last year's standings, all of our sponsors and supporters, the racetrack schedules that are participating in 2023 are all there. But then also my contact information is there, my cell phone number, as well as john@highschoolracing.org. That's JON@highschoolracing.org is my email. That people can shoot me an email with questions, or if they want to get involved, or they just want more information, want marketing materials for their school or for their for some students that they know. Reach out. Anything that I can do or anything that I can provide to help grow things and help get more people involved, I certainly will do. So reach out with questions, comments, thoughts.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. I know you're a busy guy. You've got a young 1 month old at home, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us, and hopefully look forward to seeing you at a racetrack here this summer.
Yeah, that sounds great. I will certainly be around and be popping into each of the tracks that HSRA is competing at. So come on out, watch the high school racing divisions at the tracks that we talked about. And thanks, Jay, so much for having me on Beyond the Wrench today.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.